You know that eerie feeling when your phone takes you somewhere your heart isn't ready for? That cold dread that starts in your stomach and spreads like poison through your veins? I wasn't supposed to be on Maple Drive that night, not at 9:47 p.m., not following my husband's GPS signal like some desperate detective, and definitely not stopping in front of a bakery with the lights still on and his car parked outside like a monument to my stupidity. But there I was, sitting in my Honda, hands shaking, watching through that goddamn window as my life crumbled like day-old pastry. She steps out, this woman, this stranger who's been living in the shadows of my marriage, and through the window, I see him. My Ethan. Laughing. Actually laughing, like joy is something he's capable of, feeding cake to a woman wearing my bracelet. The silver one with the infinity symbol that he gave me for our 5th anniversary, telling me it represented our endless love. Endless. What a fucking joke. Hi, I'm Claire. 36 years old, though I feel about 100 right now. I'm a financial auditor, was a financial auditor, married to Ethan, the man who lectures strangers about honesty and ethics for a living. You know the type, expensive suits, perfect smile, quotes Gandhi at dinner parties and tips exactly 18% because anything more is fiscally irresponsible. I've spent a decade tracking other people's money, following paper trails, finding discrepancies that others miss. Numbers don't lie, I always said. People do, but numbers? Numbers are pure truth. Turns out, I should have been tracking my own husband's lies instead of balancing other people's books. The irony is so thick I could choke on it. Here I am, the expert in finding the truth, the woman who can spot a fraudulent expense report from 3 offices away, and I missed the biggest fraud of all, the one sleeping next to me every night, kissing me goodbye every morning, promising me forever while financing someone else's dreams. My brain tried every excuse it could manufacture in those first horrifying moments. Maybe he's working late, though why would he be working at a bakery? Maybe it's a client meeting, though what kind of client meeting involves feeding someone cake with your fingers? Maybe the laughter is just loud networking. Professional enthusiasm. A really hands-on consultation about bread products. But then she kissed him. Right there in the window, frosting on her lips like some twisted fairy tale, wedding ring conspicuously absent from her finger. And the way he kissed her back, not the perfunctory pecks I'd grown accustomed to, but the kind of kiss that says I've been waiting all day for this. The kind of kiss he used to give me, back when I thought I knew what love looked like. And just like that, my 10-year marriage went stale faster than the cupcakes in that display case. 10 years. A decade of shared bank accounts and holiday cards and pretending his mother didn't hate me. 10 years of believing his late nights were about work ethic, not wandering ethics. 10 years of thinking I was building something permanent with someone honest. I sat there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, watching them through that window like the world's most pathetic voyeur. They looked so comfortable together, so natural. She knew exactly how he liked his coffee, black with 1 sugar, the same way I'd been making it for him for years. She touched his arm when she laughed, the casual intimacy of people who've done this dance many times before. This wasn't a first date or a moment of weakness. This was routine. This was a relationship. The rage hit me in waves. First, the hot flash of betrayal that made my vision blur. Then the cold calculation that comes from realizing you've been played. I wanted to storm in there, throw cake at both their lying faces, scream until my throat was raw. I wanted to make a scene so spectacular that every customer in that bakery would remember it for years. I wanted to hurt him the way he'd just destroyed me. But I didn't. Because as the tears finally came, hot, angry tears that burned my cheeks, something else kicked in. Training. Professional instinct. The same methodical thinking that made me good at my job. If this was fraud, then I needed evidence. If this was betrayal, then I needed proof. And if this was war, then I needed a strategy. I drove home that night in a haze of fury and determination. Ethan was already there when I arrived, lounging on our couch in his pajamas, watching SportsCenter like he hadn't just been sharing dessert with another woman. Like he hadn't just ripped my heart out and fed it to someone else along with the chocolate cake. Hey, babe, he said without looking up. How was book club? Book club. That's what I'd told him I was doing. Reading literary fiction with suburban wives and drinking wine that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. Another lie in a marriage apparently built on them. Fine, I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. Boring, actually. Discussion dragged on forever. He nodded absently, attention still fixed on the television. Well, you know how those women can talk. Did you eat? I grabbed something on the way home from the gym. The gym. Of course. Another lie, delivered so casually I almost believed it myself. How many times had he come home from the gym smelling like vanilla and cinnamon instead of sweat? How many times had I noticed and dismissed it, trusting instead of questioning? I'm not hungry, I said, which was true. The thought of food made my stomach turn. I'm going to bed. He finally looked at me then, and for a moment I wondered if he could see it, the knowledge burning behind my eyes, the accusation I was swallowing like poison. But his expression remained unchanged. Mild concern, perhaps, the way you might look at someone complaining of a headache. You okay? You seem a little off. A little off. Like discovering your husband's affair was equivalent to a minor mood fluctuation. Like 10 years of marriage could be dismissed with casual concern and a return to sports highlights. Just tired, I said. Long day. The next morning, while Ethan was supposedly at his real gym, or maybe another bakery, who could tell anymore, I was at his office, using every skill I'd learned in a decade of forensic accounting. I told his secretary I was surprising him with lunch, counting on the fact that she'd always liked me, always seen me as the supportive wife who brought homemade cookies to office parties and remembered everyone's birthdays. He's not in yet, she said with a smile. But you're welcome to wait in his office. Perfect. I had maybe an hour before he arrived, and I knew his passwords, our anniversary, our dog's name, my birthday. The same combinations he'd been using for years because changing them would require admitting that security mattered, that protection was necessary. His computer unlocked on the third try. Our anniversary date, of course. The irony wasn't lost on me, using the symbol of our commitment to uncover his betrayal. I started with his calendar, looking for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that didn't match the stories he'd been telling me. Client dinner on Tuesday nights. Late project meeting on Thursday evenings. Regional conference last weekend, the one where he'd kissed me goodbye Friday morning and told me he'd miss me, the one where he'd sent me text updates about boring presentations and hotel food. But his expense reports told a different story. No conference hotel. No business dinners at the restaurants he'd mentioned. Instead, there were charges to places I didn't recognize, amounts that didn't add up, a pattern of deception so clear I couldn't believe I'd missed it. And then I found the real evidence, transfers from our joint business account to a company called Sweet Haven Enterprises. Small amounts at first, a few hundred here and there, easily overlooked in our monthly statements. But over the past 8 months, they'd grown larger and more frequent. Thousands of dollars flowing out of our shared resources into this mysterious entity. Sweet Haven Enterprises. I traced the name through business registrations, tax filings, anything I could access with my professional credentials. The owner's name made my blood run cold, Sophie Haven. The woman from the bakery. The woman wearing my bracelet. The woman my husband was financing with our money. Cute. Really fucking cute. He'd been embezzling from our joint account to fund his girlfriend's business. Using my contributions, my hard work, my financial planning to build a life with someone else. Every dollar I'd saved, every expense I'd questioned, every budget I'd carefully crafted, he'd been siphoning it off to play house with another woman. The numbers painted a picture more devastating than anything I could have imagined. This wasn't a casual affair or a moment of weakness. This was systematic. Planned. A deliberate construction of an alternate life, funded by the destruction of ours. I photographed everything. Account numbers, transaction records, email correspondence. The digital paper trail that would unravel his carefully constructed lies. Then I went deeper, accessing cloud backups, deleted files, anything that might reveal the full scope of his deception. What I found made me physically ill. Photos of them together, not just at the bakery, but at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels I'd never seen, vacation spots that looked suspiciously like the weekend trips he'd claimed were work obligations. Pictures of her wearing jewelry I'd thought he'd bought for me, sitting in restaurants where he'd supposedly been conducting business dinners. There was a whole relationship documented in digital evidence. Birthdays and anniversaries, not ours, but theirs. Sweet messages and inside jokes. Plans for a future that didn't include me. And through it all, the steady stream of money flowing from our accounts to hers, funding a romance built on the ruins of our marriage. The rage that had sustained me through the night crystallized into something colder, more dangerous. This wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. Not just emotional infidelity, but financial fraud. He'd stolen from me, lied to me, used my own resources to build a life with someone else. And he'd done it all while lecturing others about ethics and honesty, while presenting himself as a moral authority in his professional life. I didn't confront him that day. Or the next. Instead, I went home and opened a new file on my personal computer, Project Frosting. If he wanted to play games with bakery metaphors, I could match his creativity. I called an old friend from college, Marcus, who now worked in IT security for a major corporation. Told him I suspected fraud in my personal accounts and needed help gathering evidence for legal proceedings. He didn't ask too many questions, the beauty of having friends who understood that sometimes marriages ended badly and evidence mattered. Together, we created a digital map of Ethan's deception. Every transfer, every hidden email account, every deleted text message recovered from cloud backups. Marcus showed me how to track his location history, his browsing patterns, his financial footprint across multiple platforms. This is comprehensive fraud, Marcus said as we compiled the evidence. He's been systematically stealing from joint accounts and using sophisticated methods to hide the transfers. This isn't impulse spending, this is premeditated financial deception. Premeditated. The word hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was calculated betrayal, planned and executed over months while he kissed me goodbye every morning and asked about my day every evening. You know what accountants say, numbers never lie. And these numbers told a story of systematic theft, deliberate deception, and complete disregard for our partnership. Every spreadsheet, every transaction record, every digital breadcrumb painted a picture of a man who'd been living a double life with surgical precision. But gathering evidence wasn't enough. I needed to think strategically, plan my response with the same methodical approach that had made me successful in my career. This wasn't just about catching him, it was about ensuring that justice felt as devastating as betrayal. For 2 weeks, I maintained the charade. Smiled when he kissed me goodbye. Asked about his day when he came home late. Pretended to believe his stories about client meetings and project deadlines. Every lie he told was another nail in his coffin, another piece of evidence that would make my case airtight. I consulted with lawyers, gathered my own financial records, secured my professional reputation. I moved money into accounts he couldn't access, changed passwords he might know, built firewalls around my own resources. If he'd been planning his exit strategy for months, then I could plan mine in weeks. The perfect opportunity came when Ethan volunteered to host our company's annual financial seminar. He'd been asked to give the keynote address on transparency and trust in modern business, a topic that felt like the universe's way of delivering ironic justice directly to my doorstep. He spent days preparing that presentation, practicing his talking points about ethical financial practices and the importance of trust in professional relationships. Watching him rehearse speeches about honesty while living a lie was almost surreal. The cognitive dissonance required to maintain such a performance was staggering. This could be really good for my career, he told me the night before the seminar, adjusting his tie and practicing his opening remarks. The board will be there, some major clients. If this goes well, it could mean a promotion. A promotion. built on lectures about ethics he'd abandoned in his personal life. Success achieved by preaching values he'd systematically violated. The irony was so perfect I almost laughed. "I'm sure you'll do great," I managed. "You're very convincing when you talk about trust." He smiled at that, completely missing the edge in my voice. After months of lies, he'd lost the ability to recognize truth even when it was delivered with obvious sarcasm. The day of the seminar, I arrived early and set up in the back of the conference room. Marcus had helped me prepare a presentation of my own, a comprehensive financial analysis that would make Ethan's betrayal impossible to ignore or dismiss. The room filled with colleagues, clients, board members. Ethan's entire professional world gathered to hear him speak about principles he'd abandoned. He looked confident as he took the stage, polished and professional in his expensive suit and perfect smile. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice carrying easily across the room. "I want to talk to you about something fundamental to our industry: trust. In our business, trust isn't just a nice ideal. It's the foundation of everything we do." He clicked to his first slide: transparency and trust, the pillars of ethical business. The audience settled in, notebooks open, attention focused. These were people who respected him, who saw him as a leader in ethical business practices. People who had no idea they were about to witness the spectacular collapse of carefully constructed lies. "Trust," he continued, warming to his theme, "is built through consistent actions over time. It's about aligning our private choices with our public values. It's about integrity when no one is watching. Integrity when no one is watching." The words felt like physical blows, each one landing with the weight of his hypocrisy. I sat in the back, my laptop open, my own presentation ready to deploy. He spoke for 20 minutes about transparency, accountability, and ethical decision-making. Every word felt like a betrayal, a meta-lie that compounded his original deception. The audience was engaged, taking notes, nodding along with his insights about moral leadership. "The moment we compromise our integrity," he said, advancing to another slide, "we compromise everything we've built. Trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild. Almost impossible to rebuild." He was about to learn exactly how true that statement was. Halfway through his presentation, during a pause where he was taking questions from the audience, I stood up. Every head in the room turned toward me as I made my way to the front, my laptop tucked under my arm. "Ethan," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent room. "Since we're talking about transparency, I have something to add to your presentation." His face went white. For a moment, confusion flickered across his features, followed quickly by a dawning horror as he realized what was about to happen. "Claire," he said, his voice higher than usual. "What are you doing here?" "Supporting my husband," I replied, connecting my laptop to the projector. "I thought your colleagues might appreciate a real-world case study in financial transparency." The screen behind me lit up with my own title slide, "Hidden Expenses, a Case Study in Personal and Professional Ethics." The audience murmured, uncertain whether this was planned or improvised. Ethan stood frozen at the podium, his prepared remarks suddenly irrelevant. "You were talking about integrity when no one is watching," I continued, advancing to my first data slide. "So let's examine some actual financial records and see what integrity looks like in practice." The screen filled with transaction records. His transaction records. Payments to Sweet Haven Enterprises highlighted in red, dates and amounts clearly visible. The audience leaned forward, professional interest overriding personal discomfort. "These are transfers from a joint business account," I explained, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "Small amounts at first, growing larger over time. A total of $47,000 over 8 months, sent to a company called Sweet Haven Enterprises." Gasps from the audience. Shocked murmurs. I could see board members exchanging glances, clients looking confused, colleagues beginning to understand the implications. "Sweet Haven Enterprises," I continued, clicking to the next slide, "is owned by Sophie Haven. Sophie runs a bakery on Maple Drive. The same bakery where my husband spends his Tuesday evenings and Thursday nights, The time slots he told me were client dinners and project meetings. Ethan tried to speak, but no words came out. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, his carefully constructed persona crumbling in real time. "This," I said, gesturing to the financial records displayed behind me, "is what hidden expenses look like. This is what happens when private choices contradict public values. This is what betrayal looks like when you track it systematically over time." The room was dead silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming, papers rustling as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ethan stood at the podium, exposed and humiliated, his reputation dissolving with each passing second. "Trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild," I quoted back to him, his own words now weapons in my arsenal. "Isn't that what you just told us?" I closed my laptop and walked toward the exit, leaving him standing alone on the stage, his presentation abandoned, his career in ruins. As I reached the door, I turned back one final time. "That concludes our case study in transparency," I announced to the room. "Questions can be directed to our legal team." The aftermath was swift and brutal. The board suspended Ethan within 24 hours, pending a full investigation into his professional conduct. News of his personal behavior spread through the company like wildfire, destroying his reputation and undermining every relationship he'd built over years of careful networking. Sweet Haven Bakery closed within a week. Frozen accounts, unpaid rent, the financial foundation that Ethan had built for Sophie crumbling as legal proceedings began. I felt a savage satisfaction knowing that their romance, funded by stolen money, couldn't survive without the resources he'd illegally diverted from our marriage. I didn't need to actively ruin him, his own hypocrisy did that for me. Every colleague who'd respected his ethical stance now saw him as a fraud. Every client who'd trusted his financial advice now questioned his integrity. Every business relationship he'd cultivated was poisoned by the knowledge of his deception. The divorce proceedings were remarkably smooth. When your husband has systematically stolen from joint accounts and documented his fraud in recoverable digital records, lawyers work quickly and judges show little sympathy for the guilty party. I walked away with half of our company, the half that wasn't tainted by his presence. Full ownership of our house, though I sold it immediately because every room held memories of lies. And enough documented evidence to make any future legal challenge impossible. But more than the financial victory, I walked away with something more valuable, the knowledge that I'd refused to be a victim. That I'd taken control of my own narrative, refused to let his betrayal define me, and ensured that justice felt as comprehensive as his deception. A year later, I opened my own consulting firm, TrueLedger Advisory. The name felt perfect, a promise to my clients and myself that truth would always matter more than convenience, that trust would be earned through actions rather than words. My new motto became trust, but verify, a principle I apply to every contract, every client relationship, every professional interaction. It's not cynicism, it's wisdom. The difference between faith and naivety, between trust and stupidity. Clients love the approach. They appreciate working with someone who understands that verification isn't personal, it's professional. That checking numbers isn't about distrust, it's about accuracy. That requiring documentation isn't suspicion, it's standard practice. My mornings are quieter now. No lies lurking behind casual conversations. No hidden agendas disguised as concern. Just black coffee, clean spreadsheets, and the freedom that comes from knowing exactly where you stand. I wake up in my new apartment, smaller than the house I shared with Ethan, but mine in a way that old space never was. The coffee tastes better when you're not sharing it with someone who's been feeding cake to someone else. The silence feels peaceful instead of suspicious. People ask if I'm bitter about what happened. If I regret the public nature of my revenge. If I wish I'd handled things more privately, more discreetly. No. I'm not bitter. Bitterness implies ongoing resentment, continued investment in someone else's choices. What I feel instead is clarity. Relief. The satisfaction that comes from surviving betrayal with your integrity intact. I'm just better now at reading numbers and people. Better at recognizing patterns, spotting inconsistencies, trusting my instincts when something doesn't add up. Betrayal taught me what balance sheets never could, that loyalty has actual value, that some debts collect themselves with interest, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply surviving with your principles intact. The truth is, Ethan did me a favor. Not intentionally, of course, he was too selfish and short-sighted for that kind of gift-giving. But by showing me who he really was, by forcing me to confront the lies I'd been accepting, he freed me from a marriage that was already dead. I thought I was building something permanent with someone honest. Instead, I was propping up an illusion with someone whose entire personality was performance. The man I fell in love with never existed, he was just Ethan's idea of what I wanted to see. Now I know the difference between love and manipulation, between partnership and performance, between trust and naivety. I know what red flags look like in financial records and what warning signs sound like in casual conversation. I know that when someone's stories don't match their expenses, you should believe the money. That when someone's schedule doesn't align with their location history, you should trust the data. That when someone lectures others about values they don't practice themselves, you should question everything they've ever told you. Most importantly, I know that you can survive the complete destruction of everything you thought was real. That you can lose a marriage, a shared future, a carefully constructed life plan, and still build something better from the wreckage. The GPS that led me to that bakery that night wasn't taking me to betrayal, it was guiding me toward truth. Toward freedom. Toward a life where I wouldn't have to wonder if the person sleeping next to me was lying about where he'd been and what he'd been doing. If you ever feel lost, if you ever have that eerie feeling that something isn't right, follow the GPS, check the numbers. Trust your instincts. The truth might hurt, but lies hurt longer. And if you discover that the person you trusted most has been systematically betraying that trust, document everything. Plan carefully. Strike decisively. Make sure the consequences match the crime. Because some people need to learn that trust, once broken, isn't just difficult to rebuild, sometimes it's impossible. And sometimes that's exactly the lesson they deserve.